Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to join us today. Apologize. Okay, the show is Diaspora Dispatches, and I'll divert a little bit from what we normally do, that is bringing you up to date, with the latest news headlines from across the continent of Africa. Instead, I want us to have a discussion that I'd promised that we will have during this time on the matter to do with the East African community force that has been in the Democratic Republic of Congo for quite a while now. So that is where we are going to base our conversation this afternoon. And just a little bit of some background information about even, when this East Africa Community Force, went to be or went to help in sorting the issue of stability in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This came after the leaders of the leaders of the East Africa Community agreed to send a regional force to the Democratic Republic of Congo to quell the latest flare-up of violence that is sweeping across the northeast of the country. This happened in June 2022. The decision was made during an EAC summit in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, where DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Paul Kagame joined leaders of Burundi, Kenya, South Sudan, and Uganda, as well as Tanzania's ambassador to Kenya. The mineral-rich DRC is struggling to contain dozens of armed groups in the east of the vast nation, many of which are legacy of two regional wars a quarter of a century ago. The M23, or the March 23rd movement, led primarily by Tutsis, leaped to global prominence in 2012 when it captured Goma on the border with Rwanda. It was forced out shortly afterwards in a joint offensive by United Nations troops and the Congolese army. This group took up arms again in late November 2021, having accused the Kinshasa government of failing to respect a 2009 agreement that involved incorporating its fighters into the army. Relations between Kinshasa and Kigali have been strained since the mass arrival of Rwandan Hutus accused of slaughtering Tutsis during the 1994 genocide in the DRC. The 7 member states of the East African Community agreed to deploy a regional force to the eastern part of DRC, and on August the 15th, a Burundian contingent was the first to enter the DRC under the EAC auspices. And there is no other confirmed timetable for the force's full deployment. The DRC joined the EAC, a regional economic bloc, in late March 2022. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi used the occasion of the DRC's accession to ask his counterparts for help in tackling the dozens of armed groups that have fought each other and the authorities in the eastern DRC for years. Shortly afterwards, the bloc's 7 leaders, as I have explained there, agreed to form up a force and send it to the eastern part of the DRC to help with the stemming of the continued violence. And concurrently, they launched a first round of Kenyan-mediated talks with some Congolese armed groups leaders in Nairobi in April of 2022. The same time, just after the EAC joined the East African bloc, it ascended. And as I've explained, President Tshisekedi took the opportunity to ask for help from the member states of the EAC to form a the EAC leader of that, and they had agreed to have talks with the government of the DRC. But even as those talks started, I think that was led by Kenya, and a lot of those talks actually were done in Kenya. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta mediated over these talks. And one of the key things that the president of the DRC made clear is that he did not want the M23 rebels to be part of those mediation. And so because of that, as much as the other rebels might have given up, their weapons and all that, but still the M23, which is considered the most deadly, continued with its assault and its attacks and contributed in the violence that has continued to happen in that part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And on June, as I have mentioned there, the EAC's heads of state called for an immediate ceasefire in the eastern DRC and decided to move ahead with the joint force. At the meeting, General Robert Kibochi, Kenya's Chief of Defense Forces and Chair of the EAC's military staff, presented a draft concept of operations detailing the joint forces' objectives and the rules of engagement and the resources to be made available to its commander. The draft battle plan said the region is to assemble between 6,500 to 12,000 soldiers with a mandate to contain, defeat, and eradicate negative forces in the eastern DRC, and led by a Kenyan commander and headquartered in Goma, North Kivu's capital and commercial hub, and the combat force would operate in 4 Congolese provinces, that is in Horts, Ule, Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu, and with a 6-month renewable mandate and subject to a strategic review to be conducted by parties every 2 months. Burundi, Kenya, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda at that time were all to provide troops which would jointly go fight with the Congolese forces. Okay, so that was the agreement that was done in June, and that was the announcement that was done in June. Of course, some of these were not to be fully fulfilled, but I think Burundi, Kenya, South Sudan, Uganda have all provided troops. Tanzania has its troops there, but through another mission. I think, is it a bilateral agreement between it and DRC, or perhaps under MONUSCO? I think under MONUSCO. Yeah, we don't have Tanzanian troops as part of the EAC force. So anyway, now the latest news on that, I just wanted us to get a bit of a background information on how the EAC force was formed and what necessitated it, and that happened immediately. The Democratic Republic of Congo received its accession as a member, 7th member of the East African Community Bloc. Okay, now the latest on this news that I brought to you earlier the morning today, actually. 2 of Africa's regional blocs have signaled a working cooperation in the search for permanent peace in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, signaling a concurrent troop deployment by the 2 regions. Separate decisions reached at the end of last week and on Monday this week show that the East Africa Community Regional Force EACRF and the Southern Africa Development Corporation SADC standby force will work hand in hand. DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi's office said on Monday evening that SADC will assess working areas and the actual decisions will be reached after a meeting of SADC, EAC, representatives of the Great Lakes region, as well as members of the Association of Central African States. And I'll perhaps read part of the press statement from the Congolese presidency. I'll quote, SADC has launched processes for the convening of a tripartite summit of the East Africa Community, EAC, the International Conference for the Great Lakes Region, ICGLR, and SADC, plus the Economic Community of Central Africa States, with the participation of the African Union and the United Nations, in order to consider a coordinated approach in support of the Democratic Republic of Congo. End of quote. Now, Angola is on the 15th expected to host the tripartite meeting, which will lead to decide on the arrangement. So this is something that is actively being worked upon. Kinshasa, which wants to curb the M23 rebels by force and at all cost, has been pestering the EACRF to combat the group. The EACRF, deployed last November, insists such a decision should come from the heads of state of the East Africa Community, as they had previously only allowed combat when armed groups actually refused to withdraw from occupied territories. On the 6th of May, a meeting of the signatory countries of the Peace, Security and Cooperation PSC framework for the DRC held in Bujumbura in Burundi condemned the violence of the M23, but also labeled other armed groups like the FLDR, Allied Democratic Forces, Codeco, Mai Mai, Red Tabara, and the MTM as unwanted and urged them to cease hostilities without precondition. So this was a meeting that was held. This is part of the AU Peace and Security Framework. Okay, so this meeting that was held on the 6th of May, just earlier on, a few days ago, a meeting of the signatory countries of the Peace, Security and Cooperation PSC framework for the DRC held in Bujumbura. This meeting happened in Bujumbura, okay? And in this meeting, the signatory countries condemned the M23, but also condemned and also labeled other armed groups like FLDR that has been alleged the government of DRC is supporting the Allied Democratic Forces that Uganda forced Uganda to go in the DRC to fight. They initially came from Uganda. They are an extremist group. The Codeco, the Mai Mai, which has its roots from Burundi, the Red Tabara, and the MTM. So the members, the signatories of the Peace, Security and Cooperation said all of these rebel groups, all of them are problematic, and we condemn all of them collectively, okay? And if you have been following this story and here, the allegations that have been made that the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is supporting the FLDR. And by the way, it has not come out to refute these claims, and this group is a majority made up of Hutus, okay? So who Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, is accusing of wanting to cause trouble in his country and overthrow his government and all that. Apparently, they have their history from the 1994 genocide. They went and regrouped in the DRC. So they're part of the people who also participated in the genocide in 1994. It's a long history. We will not get into that right now. But the government of the DRC has been accused of working with them. These claims have been made several times, and the government of the DRC has never refuted these claims, but we shall treat them as allegations for right now. So these member countries, the signatories of the Peace, Security and Cooperation, said all these people, all these rebel groups, M23, FLDR and others, all of these are rebels that should cease hostilities and without preconditions. All of them, okay? So that is the approach that was taken, and that is the approach that the East African Community Force also was taking, all right? So the meeting was attended by all DR's neighbors as well as Kenya. Representatives from the UN, including Secretary General Antonio Guterres, African Union Commission Chairperson Musa Faki Mohammed, and officials from the EAC and SADC and the International Conference of the Great Lakes region. Now, according to its resolution, the UN mission, MONUSCO, Congolese Army, FARDC, that is the official army of the DRC, and the EACRF, as well as the ad hoc verification mechanism that is part of the that is part of the African Union Peace and Security Architecture. You will find this verification mechanism. We'll continue to enhance coordination and synergies and to impress upon all armed groups to lay down their arms, including if necessary by use of force. So this use of force is what has been problematic. Okay, and I shall come back to it just in a bit. Now, the leaders said any other troops deployed under bilateral arrangements should commit to the same arrangement. Okay, but asked the DRC to authorize the extension of the mandate of the EACRF, which expired at the end of March and which the government of DRC has not extended. You know, they can't continue working in the Democratic Republic of Congo without the express permission of the government of the DRC, since he's the one who made, at the start, I read you there, President Tshisekedi is the one who requested for the EAC to help him. The EAC did not wake up one morning and decided, this is our problem, we're going to take on it. We're going to put up a force and send it to the DRC. President Felix Tshisekedi, after having ascended and having been made the 7th member of the East Africa Community in April, in a meeting here in Nairobi, that was his first appeal. As a new member of the bloc, he said, hey, now that we are a family, can you all help me in fighting these rebel activities in my country? But for him, have in mind, there are over 120 rebel groups in the DRC, but he only has a problem with one rebel group. That is the M23. Okay. Now, SADC's return to the picture. It had once deployed a force there. It's not the first time SADC is really getting involved in Kinshasa. It may mean that DRC is dissatisfied with the EACRF, which has chosen to be a buffer for civilians rather than take down armed groups, and that because that was the mandate of the East Africa Community Regional Force, the EACRF. Their mandate was not to have a physical combat engagement with any rebel group unless they were fighting. Then they have to do that in self-defense or something like that. But they were to ensure the people are protected and they create a buffer between those rebel groups and the people to ensure the people are safe. That is something that President Felix Tshisekedi has not been appreciative of. I think for him, he had a different perception or a different expectation of this force. So this is what Paul Diakese, President Tshisekedi's information officer, said. The question is, how will the coexistence between the SADC brigade and the forces of the EAC be? One thing is certain, the mandate of the SADC brigade, and I'd like to underscore this, and so that we can understand the psychology of the government of DRC right now in regards to the presence of EAC and the mandate thereof. So I'll start again. The question is, how will the coexistence between SADC brigade and the forces of the EAC be? One thing is certain, the mandate of SADC brigade will be offensive. That is what they were looking for. So the mandate of the SADC brigade will be offensive compared to our friends of the EAC who only have a buffer force role. That is what Paul Diakese wrote, who is President Tshisekedi's information officer. So we can very well assume this is the position of the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're saying, well, EAC mandate is to create a buffer and to ensure protection of the civilians. SADC's mandate and mission will be different. And Makiu, SADC has not really sat down and made the full details and explored their mandate and decided, and they're not yet clear. So I don't know if the government of DRC are jumping the gun too soon, coming out and making these statements, but that seems to be the expectation they have from the SADC troops once they decide and they start to deploy their troops into the DRC. So Diakese also added, this information officer of President Tshisekedi, with this evolution, the situation will be in favor of Kinshasa, and in turn, the days of the EAC are counted, especially that their presence has not satisfied the whole Congolese community, which only asks for their departure. See, they've been setting up this force for this moment right here. They've been setting up this force for this moment right here. And if you've been following this story and all these intrigues, then you would know that there was a problem, that the DRC had a problem with the East Africa Community Regional Forces. Around December, while we were on a short break, I think is it the opposition, Martin Fayulu, and I don't know which other parties, Mokwege, remember that doctor, the what is his name? The Gaina, okay, who received the Laurent Peace Prize, okay, for his efforts during war and how he saved women and all that, okay, his contribution. He was awarded for that. He's a renowned international figure. Him and others, I think, called a press conference in condemnation of the East African regional forces. And I said, what a turn of events. And they were criticizing President Tshisekedi's obsession with these forces. In fact, they called them these foreign forces, the East African Community Regional Forces. So they criticized these forces and their presence. And before these forces were even deployed into the DRC, there were already protests that were being held. And that is because the Congolese did not want certain countries to include their forces in this force. And that will be Burundi, Uganda, and obviously Rwanda, because of the allegations that have been flying around. And I was hesitant. In fact, immediately they announced this force was going to the DRC. I said, maybe it's not the best of idea. I know right now the DRC is part of us and we sort of have a responsibility to go there and call. But based on everything else and the matrix and all the dynamics and the interest playing out, I didn't think it was a safe place for EAC forces to go, or for East African community countries to be fully involved the way they chose to be involved. I don't think it was something that they thought through very clearly before acting, but now these are the results, and now we have to deal with it, okay? So let me just continue. So the SADC meeting was in Windhoek in Namibia, where the heads of state of the region met on Monday to discuss several aspects of this worrying security situation in the eastern part of the DRC, particularly in North Kivu. The meeting follows the others of ministers of SADC region held on Sunday, May the 7th, on the situation of peace and security in eastern DRC. Remember, DRC is a member of SADC, okay? Now, President Tshisekedi, who has been in Namibia, he then traveled to Botswana to pursue the diplomatic process. For the Congolese president, this question is of great importance, and the Congolese leader visited Windhoek with ministers including Jean-Pierre Bemba. You remember Bemba? Deputy Prime Minister in charge of defense and generals of the Congolese army, including Chief of Staff Christian Chiwewe. President Tshisekedi's communications office stated that in its recognition of the immediate and urgent need to restore peace and security in the eastern DRC, that this meeting of ministers of the member countries was convened, as well as this summit of heads of state of SADC, okay? So the East African Community troops consisting of Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, and South Sudan armies were deployed to the eastern DRC to combat local and foreign armed groups in North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. Since their deployment, several protest marches, as I have explained there earlier, have been organized calling on these forces to attack the M23 rebels. And for the past few weeks, a regional force from the EAC has imposed a ceasefire, speaking to both the Congolese army and the M23 rebels. So the East Africa Community Regional Force has been engaging diplomatically. They have been engaging diplomatically, speaking to both the Congolese army and also the M23. And from the reports that we've been receiving from all the countries there, is that the M23 rebels are actually cooperating on some of these agreements and some of the withdrawals and things like that has been agreed upon. But of course, the DRC has a different version of what is happening over there. So now, he was in Namibia, in Windhoek in Namibia on Monday over the meeting with the SADC. It was a summit, that was for SADC members. So now he goes to Botswana, okay? So Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi on Tuesday gave the biggest warning yet, that the East Africa Community Regional Force, EACRF, will have to leave the country by June if they are not effective on the ground. Okay? In a visit to Gaborone in Botswana, where he was pushed for a Plan B from the Southern Africa Development Corporation, where he has pushed for a Plan B to send troops, and the Congolese heads of state accused the EACRF of cohabiting. That's what he said. And it is statement like this that has continually put the lives of the East African Community Regional Forces at risk, that necessitated the resignation and the coming back home of the Kenyan commander who was leading these troops. It is sentiments like this that are careless and not thought of, that lack the level of diplomacy that it should be employed while making these kinds of statements, that is now causing even more problems. Felix Tshisekedi, the president of DRC, I can understand your frustration. I can understand you had your own vision and perhaps how you thought things were supposed to be done. And you feel frustrated because the EACRF might not be delivering on whatever it is that you thought they should have delivered by now. And they've refused to attack the M23 as you have been insisting on them to do that. When they left their countries to come to the DRC, that was not the mandate that was agreed upon, and you knew it. That is not what the East Africa community heads agreed that should be done. So you should have raised your voice during that time. Okay? The EAC heads met, they sat, they discussed, you were involved in those talks, and you understood very well the mandate of the East Africa Community Regional Force coming into the Democratic Republic of Congo. So they can't come there, then you decide to change that mandate. That is not how things work in the diplomatic circles. That is not how things work. And these are army officials. They follow the chain of command unless the chief commander-in-chief, which is all these presidents in the different countries, authorize them to take a certain mandate. They cannot do that because they're serving on behest of their countries. So that was the problem. So now you have gone to Namibia, you have complained, and now you've headed to in Botswana. You escalated this complaint, and you're saying now you're accusing the East African Community Regional Force of cohabiting with rebels after the regional troops declined to enter combat. Okay? And I will quote the Congolese presidency while he met with Botswana's president, Mokwetsi Masisi. The head of state said under the terms of EACRF's mandate, by next June, if the results of its mission are not satisfactory, this contingent, which came to the rescue of the DRC, will have to leave Congolese territory for good. First of all, that is extremely disrespectful. To understand the kind of sacrifice countries in this region have made, to understand that you just walked into this block with all this baggage, and these countries have agreed to take on and try to help you in the spirit of brotherhood, then you have the audacity. You have the audacity to go make these kinds of sentiments. This is just a slap on the face. And if I was the head of state of the Republic of Kenya, or the Republic of Uganda, or the Republic of South Sudan, or even the Republic of Burundi, if I was the head of state, I would have recalled my soldiers back home with immediate effect. Because this is not how diplomacy works. This is not how countries engage. Even if you're disappointed, even if you don't feel like you're getting what you're supposed to be getting, but such sentiments, knowing very well what countries are sacrificing to even send their troops there. For heaven's sake, do you know how much South Sudan sacrificed to put up that number of troops and to send to the DRC? That money could have gone to other needs that South Sudanese desperately need there. How much money Kenya sacrificed? How much money President Yoweri Museveni in Uganda sacrificed to support these troops and the activities to come and help you in your country? And this is what you have to say? That they came to you're hoping they will come to the rescue of the DRC. And if they don't, then they will leave Congolese territory for good. I will not even wait for June. I will not even wait for my troops to stay in the DRC up to June, this deadline that he is giving. And June is next month, by the way. So that is what he said. And then he continues to say, the mandate of the EACRF is ending in June. If by that time we assess that the mandate was not fulfilled, we will send those contingents home with honor and thank them for having tried to bring their share of contribution to peace in the DRC. You can't fix that. You've already messed that up, and you've already showed the rest of these member states your attitude and how you feel, about them. So you're coming up and you're trying to clean up your first sentence. It's not working, at least not for me. Thank God I'm not a head of state here. Otherwise, I would have made a very irrational decision. Now, the ACRF, first deployed in November, includes troops from Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, and South Sudan, as I have mentioned. The status of force agreement, this status so far, it's called SOFA, Status of Force Agreement, a pact between Kinshasa and the East Africa Community Secretariat, initially gave them a mandate for 6 months, which expired in March, but just what their mandate, it has been a bone of contention. So he's not been willing to renew this mandate. And instead of talking to the EAC heads about this mandate, he goes to SADC to have these conversations there. And yet these other member states in the EAC are waiting for a go-ahead. If at all, he will renew their mandate there. The status of force agreement that was signed for 6 months. These forces can continue operating in the DRC. They have to operate under the goodwill. They operated under the goodwill of the DRC's government. But if this is how the DRC's government is feeling, okay, now that is something else. Now, Tshisekedi says the troops should attack rebels, singling out the M23 group, which it accuses Kigali of supporting, and Rwanda has rejected these accusations. The EACRF says their mandate is peacekeeping and protection of civilians, which also supporting the political track on dialogue. So they are using 2 tracks of diplomacy, the 2 tracks of diplomacy, and then the second one is broken down in several other tracks. You have the track 1 diplomacy, which is from government to government. Then you have track 2 diplomacy, which involves government and other players, which are non-state actors. Could be the church, could be the NGOs, could be United Nations, could be these other bodies. Okay, so track 2 is considered to be more comprehensive and more involving. Okay, and track 1 diplomacy is very formal. It's between a government and a government. So this track of diplomacy, which I think they were using track 2, was to try to look at this matter comprehensively. Instead of engaging in combat, can a dialogue between the M23 and the other officials, security officials on the ground, suffice? Because a conversation between NGOs and team from MONUSCO and others, with the M23 and other rebels, suffice. So that is what they mean by this kind of track of diplomacy or dialogue. In Botswana, Tshisekedi revealed that the EAC Secretary General Peter Muthuki had requested 6 more months for the troops, but DR Congo gave them 3 months up to the end of June. The SOFA, nonetheless, has not been signed to formally extend the mandate, which is disrespectful, period. The Congolese president wants SADC troops to fight the M23. So maybe the SADC troop, and as I mentioned there, Paul Diakese, who is the president's information officer, he was very quick to say, the mandate of SADC will be different, blah, blah, blah. They've not even have a proper conversation with SADC, sat down with the member states and worked through the mandate and agree. So they're just preempting. Maybe SADC will agree to engage in a combat with the M23 and other rebels, including the FDLR, that Tshisekedi is being accused of supporting. So hopefully, or maybe they will not agree on that either. So I think that this goes on and on and on. And of course, in the DRC, many are calling on the Congolese president to rely on the natural allies of SADC. Zimbabwe, so us, we are not even natural allies, apparently. Forget the fact that Kigali went in and removed Mobutu Sese Seko. Remember that happened? So Zimbabwean, Namibian, and Angolan troops intervened to stop the advance of the RCD rebels in Kivu and Kinshasa in 1998. So they are looking back at history and they're saying, this had worked before. So maybe it will be a good idea to engage again with countries from SADC. Which for me, I thought that could have been the idea in the first instance, but. Anyway, so last week, the EACRS Commander Major General Jeff Nyaga left his station in unclear circumstances, and his replacement has not reported to duty. And of course, that President Tshisekedi did not like very well. And the fact that Nyaga wrote this letter claiming his life was in danger. And I blame that danger in the sentiments that President Tshisekedi had made a few weeks ago, saying the EAC was aiding and abetting and was being very lenient to the M23. So after that, apparently, General Nyaga started getting, Major General Nyaga started getting threats over his life because he's the one who's leading this troop, this Kenyan general. And so this is what Tshisekedi said while he was in Botswana. We also have some officers of EACRF who, when they reached DRC, said they were not coming to fight M23, which was not part of the plan. That was General Jeff's problem. So I guess he's having a problem with Kenya now. So General Jeff left spectacularly. He's talking about threats, but has never told us about those threats. A leak letter said to be his resignation was disowned by the EAC and the Kenya Defense Forces, who termed it as fake, but Tshisekedi responded to it nonetheless. Okay, since I don't have the details of that, I'll not get into that, okay? And as if EACRF only belonged to Kenya, Tshisekedi now is saying this is a direct attack to Kenya. As if the East Africa Community Regional Force only belonged to Kenya, there must be a problem. So we need to talk about it to clarify the situation, because you can see that up to now we subscribe ourselves to the process of peace because we want to see peace quickly. So from what I'm seeing from this attitude that is being exhibited by the Democratic Republic of Congo and its people and its government, I think they have no use for the East African Community Regional Force. And as a matter of urgency, I would implore all these members that send their troops to the DRC to get your troops out of there very, very quickly. If you've been watching documentaries and things coming from that country and these targeted attacks, they might even turn on you. So if he's not appreciating your efforts and he's feeling you're not doing enough, despite of the sacrifice that you have made to avail your resources and your men and women to help in quelling the violence in that area, it is about time that the EAC left. It is about time that the EAC left. We can support them from afar, but getting involved or picking on that war that he wanted the forces to pick on and only fight the M23, Nyaga said no. That is the reason why he's picking on Nyaga, because he's the one who's leading the troops. And he said no, we cannot just fight one rebel group. There are over 120 rebel groups. And for those who refuse to surrender and go to the mediation table, we have a mandate to fight all of them. So if you cannot fight all of them, we cannot fight. And if anything, our mandate did not involve fighting, a physical combat. So there was that disagreement. And I think when I was reading that story early in the year, I said, okay, that sounds like we already have a problem in Jerusalem. And sure we do. So I think the most urgent thing right now, so that we don't sever the diplomatic relations between us and the DRC and the rest of the member states, the most urgent and wise thing to do is to pull out the East African Community Regional Force, and then we can support DRC from afar. It's a member of this bloc, and then let SADC take on these efforts, and maybe if it needs extra support, the EAC can come from the back. So let SADC take on this matter and see if they're able to live up to the wishes of DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi. I think that will be my advice right now, because as it is, and such sentiments, and him saying that the East Africa Community Forces, I think I read that there's words, the choice of words that he used in the morning. Yeah, he accused them, actually. The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo accused the East African forces deployed to fight rebels in his country of working with the enemy. Those are weighty words from a head of state. That is enough to cause enough harm to these soldiers who are there. Very, very careless. Even if that is how he felt, there are proper channels of communicating and addressing such issues in diplomacy. You just don't make certain statements like that. Okay, so if that is his feeling, that Kenyan forces, Ugandan forces, Burundian forces, South Sudanese forces are working with the enemy, then what are we still doing there, President Ruto? What are our soldiers still doing in the DRC? President Salva Kiir, you need your soldiers back home to take care of your people and to cut down on that cost and whatever it is, that it was involving your soldiers to be there. Because clearly, President Tshisekedi is not appreciating their presence, and he does not feel like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, so he's saying if June comes and they've not been able to do what they're supposed to do, they will leave the country for good. Our soldiers don't even need to be there. And I think the choice of words and the platform that he chose to express these words is a complete disrespect to the people and the region of East African community who have been nothing but supportive of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I think that should sound an alarm to the rest of the member blocs. I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I'll see you again tomorrow, God willing, 10 a.m. East African time. No, tomorrow is Friday, forgot. So we shall be there 11 East African time with more news and conversations from across the continent of Africa. Enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Miriam Ogotu. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.